Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 27 of Illusions Exist. Not really sure. Oh, there we go. I don't know what's going on. I might have to reboot this or something. Not right now, though. Okay, so I want to talk about defining capitalism. The approach I'm going to take here is this, where, I believe you have to define your terms in order to really discuss them. And it's not that there's one definition, but you have to say, here's the definition I'm using, or here's a range of definitions. And right now, I'm not going to use the definition so much as just say what the approach I think for defining what capitalism means. Because I had noticed this from when I was very young, and you might have noticed the same thing, that capitalism is one of those words, not unlike a god or most words really, but where people don't have a definition. And even ordinary words, often if you stop someone, it's like, define that, people know more like the mood of a word, what kind of sentence, what kind of attitude to be having when they say it, then they want to define things. And they might understand the sense of the word and just not be that good at putting it into words, which really means that they have a feeling about it. Brings images to mind. Like a lot of people with capitalism, it's the evil capitalist, or it might be the much maligned but noble capitalist. But what does it really mean? And I've always felt you have to define your terms, which is why it turns out, I was corrected once here, that I'm not so much an atheist as what they call an igtheist, which is like, hey, you don't define what God is. If a God is really great guitar player from Seattle, yes, that's existed. If you think Jimi Hendrix is God, then okay, Jimi Hendrix existed. I believe your God exists. It depends how you define it. Alright, now, and everybody has so many ulterior motives, but as a good American boy, I've always wanted to define capitalism, fairly. I didn't want to be out for a hit job, per se. If there's something wrong with capitalism, I'd like to relate it back to what the word capitalism means, and not just be, well, there's a bunch of guys called that, and I was told not to like them. Or told to like them. Either way. Obviously, being a young kid in the 70s, capitalism definitely, Superman is suspicious of it. So, but when I was young, I had this idea, and we'll go through just a couple little touch points, what capital might mean, and then that'll be my approach for defining capitalism. What does capital mean? What's a neutral, without loading it with a bunch of value judgments, what's a value neutral, purely meaning, no emotional baggage, definition of the word capital, and capitalism will be like the promotion of that. Okay, so to me, the interesting thing, coming from my own background, is when I was younger, teenager, or whatever, I thought capital meant money. And so, capitalism, is it the system whereby if you have money, you get to run things? Capitalocracy? Is it the system by where if you have money, you get to get more money? That's what I thought it was for a long time. But then I came along and looking at, the economics of Adam Smith, which I think he's kind of started the capitalistic idea, but as such, and he defined capital. And so from Investopedia, right? So this is just a conventional, like, hey, I need to know what it means because I'm going to be an investor. I want to know what people mean when they say. So this is the funny thing. This is certainly no socialist interpretation of what capital is, but it's not just money. Now, it's a financial asset, such as funds held in deposit accounts, but really it's this other thing, see, as well as the physical factors of production. In other words, manufacturing equipment. It includes facilities, the buildings used to produce and store manufactured goods. The materials used and consumed as part of manufacturing do not qualify as capital. So that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about. We're just talking about this thing where, so like an ancient cave person, their rock or their arrow, bow and arrow that they used to hunt with, that would be capital. right? And so to have productive work is modeled on kind of the farm or even the hunter principle. You have certain tools that enhance your productivity. That's capital. And you have your labor, where you use those tools, and then you have land, the territory that you're doing the hunting. Now, the interesting thing about the materials like the arrow or the rock is that those are also wealth. Wealth is your material stock. The difference is that wealth is just designated for you to use. It's a rock that's pretty, and you put it on the shelf. It's an arrow that was your grandfather's arrow. You don't use it. You put it on the wall to look at. You have something that you do use for your own enjoyment, as opposed to putting it to a profitable use. When you do put it to a profitable use, then it's capital. So Adam Smith's way of saying it was, Adam Smith defines capital as, quote, that part of a man's stock which he expects to afford him revenue. The term stock is derived from the Old English word for stump or tree trunk and has been used to refer to all movable property on a farm since at least 1510. Right, so Henry George uses an example of there's some people or a guy that organized, he got a bunch of baskets and some boats, and he hired some people. Hey, take these baskets and boats out to the Farallon Islands, collect eggs. Come back, I'll let you keep some of the eggs, I get the rest of the eggs, boom, we'll do this every day. What do you think? That guy was the capitalist, those guys were the labor. And by the way, in Henry George describing this, using, the Adam Smith definitions is like, the rent's too damn high. Who's taking all the extra productivity? I mean, capitalists may be letting the money pile up in their savings accounts, and at certain times in American history, maybe the worker was letting money pile up too, but they're not taking a bigger percentage of the day-by-day profit. Where's that going? Where's all our increased productivity going? Oh yeah, it's going into the price of land, and therefore the price of rent. So people that just hold on to the rent for the property where you do things, people that own the property where you're going to go take that arrow and hunt, they just keep raising their feet and they don't do anything. The capitalist does something. What does he do? He or she lets you use their printing press. Here's a printing press. You become a newspaper. I'll give you the capital. You give me a little bit of percentage on your profits. That's fair. That's just like when capital is money. Oh, of course they get a little percentage for giving you it up front. Of course they get a little percentage if a guy says, here, you could be an Uber driver with my car. I just want a cut of your Uber profits. That's capitalism. You're the labor. Perfectly fair. The fact that the guy that owns the territory that you have to have your factory on keeps getting more and more and more rent. It just goes up forever. Not 100%. It goes up 200, 300, 400, Does the price on loans go up 300, 400%? No, it's usury at 15 or 16%, according to me, maybe even less. But it doesn't go to 500 and 800 and 9,000%. There's a certain limit on the practicality of that, but that's exactly what happens with but now I digress, with rent, but I digress. So if capital is wealth, right, that you use for a profitable enterprise, for productive enterprise, I should say. Might not be profitable. So let's say I have this shirt and this is just wearing it. That's my wealth. This is what I use to keep warm. I rent it out. I rent all my shirts out. I've turned it into capital. So a capitalist is somebody that invests their wealth in their business. So when Betsy DeVos takes money and buys a $20 million yacht, that's not capitalist. Capitalist is when she takes that $25 million and puts it into her business, right? So like Ross Perot became a billionaire doing government contracts. Well, that $1 billion is basically the amount he overcharged for the work that got done. One guy did not do $1 billion worth of work. Sorry, you guys. What happened was one guy managed to arrange for the company to get overpaid and be in a situation to take the overpayment. right? And if he hadn't kept that billion for himself, if he put it back into his company, all that billion, that would have been capitalism. And to the degree that that company of his made 10 billion and 9 billion of it went back into the company, well, yeah, Ross Perot was a capitalist. So capitalism is when you invest your wealth in a business. When you get some sort of a windfall to your wealth and you put it back in your business. When you send it out in dividends to the stockholders, that's not the capitalist part. The capitalist part is when you keep it in your business. So I think by this definition, a lot of our capitalists aren't really very much capitalists. They're doing something else. But be that as it may, I think this is a productive way to think about capitalism because it goes with what the word capital actually means, that commonly normal people, we don't know that's what it means, but the business world knows that the capital doesn't just mean money. It can be translated into money, but that's the whole liquidity of your capital and whatnot. And so, this is a good way, I think, philosophically. You can't just, it's fine that we have words. I use a word, you might catch me, define it. And I'm like, I stumble, it's so hard to define. So you should be able to define your words. Real life, natural language, you can't always define words, or they can be tricky. Like the word the is actually tricky to define. You can describe it, but... So I'm not saying somebody's some big stupid head if they can't define a term. I'm saying as philosophers, yeah, that's what we got to do. We got to define the term. We got to come up with 5, 6, 7 different definitions, and try to apply them and see how they work. And this is my latest understanding of capitalism. Capitalism is a philosophy that promotes investing your wealth in productive endeavors instead of wasting it on a luxury. All right, let's see if we have some comments. Oh, Barklord. Hey, Barklord. The usual definition is when there is private ownership of the means of production. Well, isn't that the Marxist definition of it? So, the means, now, part of the means of production issue is the controversy where I take Henry George's side, right? Where land is not just a kind of property. So land isn't capital. Land is a third category. Capital, labor, and land. So when you have land as a capital asset, then here's the problem: is that the guy that owns the printing press also owns the land you use the printing press on, and then labor is just this thing that has to come in where the production, which is the machinery you need and the place you need to do it, that's the means of production, is owned by a capitalist. So that's the Marxist idea. Analyzes it that way. And I think that's compatible with my idea of capitalism as investing your wealth. But it emphasizes something entirely differently. And what is the definition of capital that would lead to the idea that it's the means of production? Is capital the means of production? I prefer the idea of capital as it's traditionally thought as an enhancement of production. So, for example, if you're going hunting and you have a rock, it enhances over trying to hunt with your hands. If you have a bow and arrow, that enhances hunting over, just using a rock, and so on. King Kush, the avocado says pork bellies are up. Usually they're hanging down. The fact that someone owns the means in terms of circumstances of other people's means of survival. It's a belief system based on property acquired by accumulation of exchange value enforced by the state. Okay, Barklord, but that's a valid definition as well. It's a parallel or alternate definition. It's an empirical definition of what we've seen the people that call themselves capitalists actually act like. But it's not based on the word capital, right? It doesn't fit with the analysis of economics that led to the word capitalism. Okay? And the people that believe in capitalism, they're claiming to say, they're always saying, give us tax cuts. Why? Because then we'll have more wealth. And we're capitalists. What do capitalists do with wealth? They invest it in their businesses and end up creating jobs. But they don't invest it. They just hold on to it, and they're letting it pile up, and they buy luxury items, right? So they're claiming to be the kind of capitalists I just gave the definition of, and they're not. And I think they're actually hypocrites, and it would be better to have this definition of capitalism that's based on the definition of capital that undermines their claim to be the kind of people that if you give them an extra $1,000, by golly, they're going to put 900 of it into their business when they don't. Okay, and most people that say, hey, I'm pro-capitalist, they will not say they are for what you're talking about, right? So it becomes a crypto philosophy like everything today, where people say one thing and doing another, thinking another, and I'd rather it not be a crypto philosophy. And most of them do not think that they believe in what you described, which is a form of slavery. Now, you and I think that that's what's going on, but in that degree, I think maybe capitalists aren't even really capitalists. I think being a capitalist isn't the greatest thing, end all be all. Reinvesting your wealth in your business isn't the end all be all, but it's a pretty good thing. It's a pretty good thing to invest your wealth in something productive that other people are helping out with and are also profiting from. And that's not really what these capitalists that call themselves capitalists that we have are doing. They're doing what you're describing. So should they be able to do what they're doing and us call it capitalism and it fit the description you give, but in reality, they talk about Adam Smith and capital is the wealth you invest in productive activity and in your businesses, and they're not actually doing that so much. Especially today where, someone like Trump is investing bankers' capital. He's not investing capital. That's not capitalism. All right. Barklord. If a brilliant musician makes $2 million and invests to buy a local restaurant, should the employees who applied to work for the original owner feel that the new owner is legit? Honestly don't know. I mean, I see where you're going, and I believe in a democracy in the workplace, but the way I see it is, the capital investment, the building, I don't think it should include the actual land as unimproved, but it might as well. You can, in this case, you can almost ignore that. The building is capital, the kitchen equipment's capital, and all of that. And if that guy sells all that capital to someone else, then the new owner is the legit owner of that capital. However, I believe in a democracy at the workplace where their rights wouldn't change with respect to the new owner. They're just dealing with a new owner. I don't know who this guy is, Barklord. Carl Polanyi is also in agreement that land is not legitimate capital. Oh, I'll have to look him up. So this is definitely a Henry George idea. I've noticed Henry George has a popularity. I'm not sure if it's growing or not since I've discovered him, but I see him more and more. But, once you discover, it definitely, the idea has not died, and there's activity in that area. And I think, I wouldn't say I'm a Georgist. I don't agree with every little insight he seemed to have, but in terms of laying out the terms, which he lays out just like Adam Smith pretty much, but then there's some controversy on the categorization of land, though all the classical, evidently it seems like all the classical Western, capitalist economists or whatever, including the socialist-leaning ones, but I mean using these, they believe in these terms, the Adam Smith kind of terms, and which evolved or whatever and can change, but people treat land a little differently, and probably more of the convention right now is to just munge it in with other kinds of property, possibly making a wealth, but they also, from what I was reading, sort of, it's not like, it's a special kind of wealth kind of thing. So, I I think it's inevitable that will win in the analysis one way or another, however it rolls out. What do you mean, neither is labor? So Caller Polanyi is also in agreement that land is not legitimate capital, neither is labor. Well, yeah, labor is not, if that's what you mean. I don't think that it's not conventional to think of, it's definitely conventional to distinguish labor from capital. You get into a lot of subtleties like that one I read in Investopedia where it's like, oh, all the materials you have, the lumber that you use up making the furniture isn't capital. You used capital to get it. And that starts to get into just like how businesses do accounting these days, more than the philosophical part. Last Barklord comment. The fact that someone is a great musician and it translates into exchange value is completely separate from the power afforded a person when they buy another business like a restaurant. Yeah, but see, the way I see it, Barklord, is kind of, I thought of an obtuse relation, is that if the worker has a fair right, then everybody can trade, and you still have your rights when you get a new owner. So if I own a car and I loan it to somebody that drives it for Uber, is getting ripped off by Uber, but so am I, and so we make that work, then if somebody else buys that car and that person loans it to the Uber driver, they're in the same kind of situation. I don't see a problem with that. We have a problem with the fact that, the capitalists have become so wealthy, and they generally also are the landlords, that we get this triangulation. But I want to break these things down into what do the words reasonably mean? What if we want to do like logic mathematics with these terms and understand the world and say how economy works? We want to get it down into words that are value neutral. The word capital as wealth you use for your business, like I have 4 computers in this room and I use them for my business. I was using this one, not so much at the moment, for my business. But then that's capital. Boom, that's value neutral. That's just a way of saying, I use this thing a certain way, and it has to do with economics. Here's this term. Boom, we got a term. Okay, I want to understand something like an ism based on that. I want to understand skepticism based on what it means to be skeptical, and so on and so forth, right? So that's all I'm saying. I don't disagree with your analysis of capitalism, the system we live in that we call capitalism. What should it be? What should it mean? If somebody's like a proud capitalist, what should it mean? Yeah, it should mean that they don't take a bunch of luxury dollars out of it, that they are reinvesting it. And that would actually justify them having control of that money if they just say, yeah, because I want to control my business and I put the money back in the business. When they start extracting it, and for that matter, transferring it into other kinds of ownership that give them certain powers, that's when you have a problem. And frankly, it's not like I'm trying to rehabilitate the definition of capitalism. I think it's not so bad as I once thought, based on the real definition of capital. So, I'm going to head out now, but Barklord, this is interesting. We should have a hangout soon. So you say, but employees are treated as part of the property of business. Yeah, that's some sort of a corruption of our system that doesn't matter what you call it, right? Certain issues, it doesn't matter what you call them. It doesn't matter whether you call capitalism this or that, or capitalism ends up being good or bad. Employees are treated as a human resource like any other resource, like office supplies, and that's fucked up, whatever the definition. But I'll end with this, because it also, watching Destiny argue about capitalism and socialism and stuff made me realize, because Destiny was arguing against socialism as though socialism doesn't make everything good. Look at all the bad things in socialist government. And other guys going, yeah, what about in the capitalist government? It's like, here's the thing, you guys. If you have 1,000 people and they're a bunch of assholes that just are greedy and want to do well for themselves, and you say, hey, you 1,000 guys, you have to run a socialist government, they will be assholes. They will use a bunch of socialist rhetoric, they will use some patterns that look socialist, and they'll set it up for themselves, given that opportunity. And if you say you're going to be capitalist, it's the same fucking thing. If you have a bunch of people that care about other people and want society to be good, and they don't want to step over homeless people on the way to work, and they care about their fellow man, same thing. Whichever system you force them to set up, they will run for the best or the worst, right? So, we have to remember to separate out questions of character from questions of, which game are we playing, chess or checkers, and can you make a good system out of that game? Mostly it's going to come back to people of character. And my problem with what we call capitalism, not the definition that I'm giving today, but the system of Darwinian power plays where employees are human resources, that's an exploitive system, and the way people think of it lends itself to exploitation. So I think it's a bad system in that way. I like a system that at least reinforces, or over time, doesn't keep the power in the hands of that original 1,000 greedy people. I will do that, Barklord. And I will read to everybody. Barklord is suggesting, well, you probably can read the chat, how this shows up. But The Great Transformation by Fred Block. Maybe we can, maybe I should do some read on it. That could be our hangout topic, Barklord. All right, everybody. I love talking to you, Barklord, but it seems so uneven through the chats that it's not as sustainable. I have to get you in live. If you're going to be up for a while, leave a comment on this video. I guess we could have a hangout. I haven't tried that on this computer. Is that set up? Yeah, why wouldn't it be? They don't have the live hangout. Anyway, I don't need to think about this on air. But, all right. Goodbye from Illusions Exist and the Pyrrho Show. It's really pyrrho, but, it's also pyro.